Hi, my name is Noah Venable, and this is a video presentation titled Shakespeare and Masculinity. This video presentation will address how conditions are created that cause the media to portray negative masculinity, specifically in Shakespeare, and how society and the media can change these negative archetypes to influence a more positive definition of masculinity. To do this, I will analyze Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet, and Love Labour's Lost for the themes of negative masculinity, and to conclude, I will use the affective disposition theory and the social identity theory to explain how Shakespeare perpetuates negative masculinity. There are two examples within Romeo and Juliet that display negative masculinity, the first being the introduction when Samson and Gregory, two Capulets, are discussing what it would be like to defeat the rivals' household's men and take their women. They state, "'Tis true, and therefore women, being the weaker vessels, are ever thrust to the wall. Therefore I will push Montague's men from the wall, and thrust his maids to the wall." This is in Act 1, Scene 1, lines 16 through 19. So at this time, rape culture had not yet been made aware or have an awareness made to it, and the horrors had not yet been discovered, but this further proves that men have a mindset that's entitlement to women when they're in their in-group mindset of men, being that whenever they're together, they're more likely to try to force and assert dominance in order to impress the other men in the room. The second example is when Mercutio and Tybalt fight to the death, knowing that it will result in their death. Mercutio draws his sword first, stating, "Will you pluck your sword out of its plicture by the ears? Make haste, lest mine be about your ears ere it be out." This is in Act 3, Scene 1, lines 81 through 83. This quote demonstrates the internal and external pressure of men to assert dominance and strength. This also demonstrates the group mindset of men, being that they try to impress or prove something to other men. These two scenarios outline male homosociality and the bad behaviors that result from men within their in-group assimilations and out-group assimilations in the cases of the two households. Next, I'll be discussing Hamlet, a story that contains themes of men's mental health and the perceived power over and the oppression of women. Hamlet tends to victimize himself during much of the play, which also affects his relationships, as he follows a negative thought pattern throughout much of the play. This includes his famous monologue, "To be or not to be." He displays in the speech the desire to not be weak, a creation of society into negative masculinity. He states, "The undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveller returns, puzzles the will and makes us rather bear those ills we have than to fly others that we not know of. Thus conscience does make cowards of us all, and thus the native hue of resolution is sicklied o'er with a pale cast of thought. With this regard their currents turn awry and lose the name of action." This is in Act 3, Scene 1, lines 87 through 96. Hamlet would much prefer to hide in the face of death than face his own fear and emotions, and he uses this fear to call himself a coward, stating that the fear of death makes him cowardly, and many modern men with poor mental health face similar struggles in response to society's expectations. Next, I'll be discussing Polonius, which is the father of Ophelia, who is Hamlet's lover. Polonius is also one of the co-conspirators to Hamlet's demise. He tells Ophelia, "Think yourself a baby," in Act 3, Scene 1, lines 114. This is because he believes he has control over her and her thoughts. He's asking her to think herself a baby to assert control over her and to tell her that her thoughts have no meaning. This further defines the stratification of men and women and existing divides still in society. The next play I will be describing is Love Labour's Lost, a tale in which four men, including the king, take an oath to be students and put their studies over women for 3 years until they all break the oath and simultaneously fall in love. This is regarded as a comedy, but there's many themes of objectifying women and how men's dedication inevitably becomes abrasive behavior. When taking the oath, the king compares women to the conquest of war, and says, "Therefore, brave conquerors, for so you are that war against your own affections and the huge army of the world's desires, our late edict shall strongly stand in force." This is in Act 1, Scene 1, lines 8 through 11. This stands to prove that men think themselves to be the conquerors of women, which furthers this idea of homosociality. The next thing I'll be talking about is when Rosalind, one of the prince's ladies, claims when asked a question about the history of one of the men that how needless was it then to ask the question, to display some semblance of control. And this was in Act 2, Scene 1, lines 119 through 120. In this, they're basically saying that the desire of men is actually impelled whenever women resist the operations of the economy being men's exchange for women. And lastly, I'll be discussing how the media of Shakespeare actually perpetuates the negative masculinity currently in the system, and how this stems from the affective disposition theory and the social justification theory. The affective disposition theory relates to how an individual watching a piece of media morally relates to the character. If the individual watching the piece of media feels a moral connection to the character, whether or not that means their morals align, the individual will feel a positive, neutral, or negative disposition to the character, which then causes the person to predict, or causes us to be able to predict the extent of the type of emotion that the reader will feel for the character. So, for masculinity to be seen as positive, the society now must define what positive masculinity actually looks like and how the outline can be changed within the status quo. This can be done with a unified communal identity that all is working towards the goal of a new definition of masculinity.